Welcome to Sacred Stories, a sacred space where the beautiful divine voices of today are shared. I am your host, Reverend Patricia Brooks, and together, with the help of our incredible and courageous guests, we are going on a powerful journey, a sacred journey, into our shared consciousness. Today, we are meeting Robert McPhee, the founder and president of HeartSet. Robert is the creator of the Excellent Decisions Leadership Development Program, and the focus of Robert's work is helping leaders create the results and the experience of life they really want in a world of constant change. He does this by facilitating highly interactive workshops and hands-on follow-up, all based on the learning and application of fundamental principles. Robert is also the author of the book and partner journal, Excellent Decisions. He is the former director of training for the Canfield Training Group, having worked directly with Jack Canfield, co-creator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series and author of the Success Principles. And Robert is a founding member and former executive director of the Transformational Leadership Council. So it's my absolute pleasure to say welcome, Robert McPhee, to Sacred Stories.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. That Transformational Leadership Council is a mouthful, isn't it?
Thanks for pointing that out.
That's my favorite title of all the titles I've ever had, being called the Executive Director of the Transformational Leadership Council. Although people didn't know what it meant, it sure sounded impressive.
It did. That's why I attempted to read it. I wasn't very eloquent, but I read it. So anyway. So Robert, I'm very excited that you're here, and I'm very excited for you to share the current work that you're doing. Listeners, I have a little heads up. I do have an idea of what Robert's up to, and that's why I invited him on our show. And then obviously to delve into the more personal side and sacred story of Robert McPhee. But Robert, share with the listeners. You have a new mentoring program that you're developing that you're very excited about.
I do, and I am really excited about it. And you mentioned in my kind of formal bio-driven introduction that I do a lot of work with leaders, and I always have done a lot of work with leaders. And what I'm focusing on now is really working with young people and coming to them from the point of view that they're all leaders. And I find it really interesting with young people that in some cases when people are first taking on the role of leaders, they may be doing that in ways that don't involve any followers. Sometimes, especially for young people, the most bold and strong leadership moves that people can make are really involved with making decisions and taking actions based on their own vision and values, what's really important to them, who they really are, even if other people aren't necessarily going to follow. And you mentioned the book title and the work that I do being called Excellent Decisions, and that's really how I define an excellent decision, is that it is making those decisions based on vision and values instead of all the incredible stress and pressure that we're all faced with in today's world, and again, so much with young people. And the mentoring work that I'm doing actually evolved out of some work that I was doing with colleges and universities, where I was getting out and sharing the work that I do, the fundamental principles, personal achievement, professional achievement kind of work that I do, sharing it with college students. And I realized that in their world, the external stresses and pressures were coming from peer pressure, from social pressure, from academic pressure, and also from parental pressure. And I saw as a parent that my own children, because they grew up while I was doing the work that I do, while I was working with amazing people like Jack Canfield, who you mentioned, they grew up around that work and they grew up in those kinds of conversations. And for me, it was kind of like an unfair advantage as a parent. And I saw how well my own children are doing. My youngest daughter just graduated from high school last year and completed her first year of college this year. And all three of my children are doing what I call thriving. They're achieving at a high level, which as a parent, I love that. But they're also really good people. They're happy and they're making contributions and they're good citizens and good friends and they're close with each other and all the things that I really would love to see as a parent. But I see that a lot of our young people are not having that kind of experience. They're not handling all the stress and pressure in quite the same way as I see my own children dealing with it. And I also saw that a lot of the parents that are out there who are all doing the can with the resources they have, but in many cases haven't been given much in the way of resources, and certainly haven't had the kind of opportunities that I had to be around some of the best teachers and trainers and speakers and authors in the whole world in the areas of personal and professional development. So I shifted gears a little bit, and the mentoring work that you're talking about is now working with parents. It's reaching out to parents and supporting them in supporting their children, starting mostly in like the middle school and high school area, but going, working with younger children as well, and certainly working with older children, because I come from a place believing that it's never too early or never too late. But giving parents the opportunity to be able to support their children in really powerful ways, and mentoring their children, shifting from a kind of a teaching and preaching kind of model, which we see from parents so often, and shifting into a mentoring model, and really having parents see the value of living the principles that they'd like to see their own children living by, and seeing how much easier and much more effortless it can be to see our children, again, achieving at a super high level, but also having a really great experience of life. So as a parent, I'm super excited about it. It feels really on purpose to me, and it really does come out of the heart of the work that I've been doing for the past 20 years or so.
Yeah, I love your description of an excellent decision. You say that an excellent decision is a decision based on vision and values. And I think that applies to the young people you're talking about, to the parents you're talking about, really to all of us. I mean, what a great guiding principle to recenter, to show up from that place, right? Ask that question, is this an excellent decision, right? And be able to respond in a way based on vision and values as our guides.
Right. And it's questions that in a lot of cases parents aren't asking because they don't really know how to ask it. They've never really been invited to ask those kinds of questions. They don't understand the importance of those kinds of questions. So in many cases, our young people are not really asking the questions about what's really important to them, about who they really are. And oftentimes, those kinds of questions come up under really high stress, high pressure situations, which is the hardest time to try and figure it out. We have young people really starting in middle school who are making decisions about things like drugs and drinking and sex at ages that they're just way too young to really handle those kinds of major decisions. And in a lot of cases, way too many cases, they are making those decisions based on the external stress and pressure, the peer pressure, the social pressure especially. And the outcomes are not good. And in today's world, this really first came up for me when I was working with colleges and universities. And in today's world, when a young person makes a bad decision, when they make one of those decisions that's driven by peer pressure or social pressure or whatever it might be, there's always someone standing right next to them with a video camera in today's world, ready to post it on the internet forever. And I don't know about you. I mean, I say this to people, I don't know about you, but I made a couple of decisions and did a couple of things in college that I'm really glad no one was standing next to me with a video camera. It was an important part of the learning process, but it didn't end up being something that, really negatively impacted my whole life. And in my case, it was just kind of stupid stuff. It would involve things like drinking a little too much and behaving in ways that were basically embarrassing. It wasn't a matter of, injuring someone or anything like that. But it would have been really embarrassing and in some ways humiliating to have that posted for all to see. There's a few things that my friends from college still laugh at me about to this day, and that's fine. Again, it's part of the learning. But the stakes are a lot higher for our young people in today's world. And also for adults in many ways, in terms of the decisions that we make and the actions that we take as a result of those decisions, which lead to the results that show up in our lives.
Right. I love that you're concentrating on the parents, because I agree, and I'm a parent, and I have 2 daughters in college, and I agree that we live in a world that it's very difficult to be a parent. Parenting is changing minute by minute, and unlike most other things, we're not trained for this. And when we talk about making an excellent decision in relationship to our children, something based on vision and values, most of the time, as you said, it's very high stress, and we are in a very reactionary emotional state, which is the worst possible state, right, to make a decision from. So that someone like yourself is creating work or working with the parents to help parents understand and possibly show up a little bit differently in the relationship with their children and how they parent, I think is incredibly, incredibly important and needed today.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and it does feel really, really important to me. It feels very, very on purpose to me, and it almost feels like an obligation to me. Like it's that important. I don't mean like in a have to kind of a way, but like a kind of an I can't not do this kind of a way. And it really does come from looking back on my own life and seeing the opportunities that I've had. Like you mentioned, I had the opportunity to work for a number of years with Jack Canfield, who was the co-creator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series. He's an amazing, amazing man. He's, in terms of having someone as a mentor, who was just incredible. He's best known for Chicken Soup for the Soul, but his core work is really in the corporate and educational world, teaching about peak performance and how to really create not only the results that we want in our lives, but the kind of experience we want in our lives. And he's literally one of the very, very best. And he's the real deal. In terms of having worked really closely with him and gotten to know him personally and professionally, I can tell you that Jack is the type of person who really lives the work that he teaches. What he's talking about from stage, if you were in his home, if you were with his family, you would see that he lives his life in alignment with those principles that he teaches, which unfortunately is not always the case with people in and around the personal and professional development world. But with Jack, it was just amazing. And again, for my own children to grow up in an environment, and I tell people, I didn't have like a flip chart and a PowerPoint presentation every night at the dinner table, but they literally grew up around this conversation. They understand the importance of personal responsibility. They understand the importance of having a vision. They've been asked questions about their values. They're comfortable taking risks. All those things that are just fundamental core principles that will really help them with whatever they decide to do with their lives kind of came naturally to them because it was always part of the conversation. But I realized that my background and the work that I was doing was very unique and very different than what most parents have accessible and available to them. And I totally agree with what you said, which is most parents don't have hardly anything. I joke about the fact that when we leave the hospital, the people from the hospital make sure the baby is strapped correctly into the car seat. And then after that, we're pretty much on our own, that's their big responsibility. And then in terms of raising this child and helping it become, a fully functioning and high achieving and thriving human being, we're pretty much on our own. And that's where I think my sense of just, this is something I have to do, it's that important, comes from that sense of having kind of an unfair advantage myself and just seeing how remarkable the results have been. Parenting is not an exact science. I always kind of caution people, I'm not putting myself out there and saying I'm a perfect parent. I don't think there is such a thing. But I do see that my own children are doing extremely well. And again, not just on an achievement level, but on what I call a happiness scale, using the ancient Greek definition of happiness, which is the experience of joy while in pursuit of your potential. I just learned that this past year, and I just love that definition of happiness because it's not just like, I just lost my job and I'm still smiling, or I'm 50 pounds overweight and I'm still smiling. The experience of joy while in pursuit of your potential is exactly what I see with all three of my children, and it's exactly what I want as a parent.
I appreciate that you say parenting is not an exact science, and I appreciate that you say you're not a perfect parent. I also appreciate that you say that you've had and your children have learned by being in an environment when these principles are practiced. So the principles that can be practiced really by anyone. There's principles that can be learned by anyone. And just like we learn or are trained or, have self-improvement in all areas of our life, we absolutely can apply that to parenting. And it doesn't take away from the personal relationship, right? It doesn't make parenting business. In my book, when I listen to you talk and I get to know your work better, it's really about being able to have the conversations, receive the mentoring, step out of the very emotional, personal role that we find ourselves in, most of the time very stressed, especially as we're raising our children, about all these outside pressures, and having the ability to have someone like yourself or the training that you're providing just kind of like recenter, refocus, and work through things with them so they can make decisions based on vision and values. They can show up in relationship with their family calmer, more clear-headed, with a vision of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you talked about kind of the relationship that we end up having with our children. And it's one of the things that really breaks my heart is I see so many parents who really don't have great relationships with their children. There's a kind of an ongoing battle, win, lose, me versus them kind of battle in terms of parenting. And I look with my own 3 children and the relationships both my wife and I have with them, it's not like that at all. And they're all very different, 2 daughters and a son. They're fairly close together in age, all 3 of them within 7 years. But we have wonderful relationships with them. They're all off living in different places now, but we still get on video calls with them. And for my wife and I, it's great to connect with them, but it's also, I think, even more magical to just step back and watch them connect with each other. My son, who's between the 2 girls, is getting ready to go study in Europe for a semester next year. And he's leaving in a couple of days to go visit his sister in Seattle. And that's totally his decision. Like he wants to go see her because he hasn't seen her for a few months and he knows he won't be able to see her for about 5 months while he's gone. And I just look at that and I go, that is so cool. Again, that's exactly what we want as parents, is that kind of relationship with our own children and also those kinds of relationships amongst themselves, like amongst the siblings. And it's absolutely possible, and I think you kind of intimated that, it can be so much less stressful. It can be so much less a feeling of hard work and effort in order to accomplish that. And, I think this is really the beauty of the whole personal and professional development world, that the true fundamentals of it is absolutely possible to accomplish more without so much struggle and stress and feeling of hard work and effort and willpower. It is possible to do that if we kind of master the inner game and therefore show up differently in our world. And I don't think there's any more powerful arena for that to be happening than it is in the world of parenting, because it not only affects our own experience. Like I see these parents that are really struggling and I just go, wow, I'm so thankful that's not me. That's not the experience of parenting, the experience of having a relationship with my children that I want. And to be able to have that great relationship without sacrificing their ability to thrive in the world is, I think, the dream scenario that we want to see as parents.
Right. Well, so let me just throw this out there, though, because that sounds idyllic. And so I'm going to share a little bit of my sacred story as a parent, because I know the other side of that to some degree. So all best intentions, love my girls greater than I love myself. I think all parents would say that. Went through when my girls were in their mid-teens, what was really an unexpected divorce for me, set me off into, I was told I was in a depression at the time. I would have to agree. And very, very difficult couple years ensued. And when I was within my personal struggles, and especially my older daughter, my children love me. There's no question my children love me. We love each other. However, she started struggling incredibly because she needed to see me strong, and I was crumbling before her eyes. Her world, her foundation was changing. She didn't know what to do. The arguments, the fights, the battles that ensued were something I'd never want to revisit. And at one point, I didn't believe I could have a good relationship with my older daughter because I just couldn't see my way out of it. And I didn't necessarily go through your mentoring program. I really wish you were around, 5 years ago. Other life events happened. My spiritual journey ensued. I've done a lot of studying, spiritual studying and so forth, seminary, everything. And I have come out, I believe, on the other side. And I have learned very much, from those challenges and struggles, what you're offering to parents hopefully they don't have to go through that. So I bring that up because sometimes there's some really real world things and issues and problems that are within the family that add to the relationship and the struggle within the relationship. And it doesn't mean that the child and the parent don't love each other. It means they just don't even know how to relate at that moment any longer. So I always say, parents, if you're listening and you are in the situation and feeling that you can resonate with anything that I am sharing, I can tell you there's absolutely hope. I can tell you the love is still there and the relationship can be salvaged and it can become incredibly beautiful. I am living proof that me and my daughters of that. Robert, to have somebody to be able to show up and reach out to someone like you, and you're creating an online mentoring program that I could do that from the privacy of my own home, and I don't have to show up and raise my hand and say I think I'm a really bad parent, right? Because we never want to tell anybody that, right?
Right.
I certainly did
sure.
it. I put our smiles on when we were out. Everybody thought we had the most idyllic, perfect relationship, and that was not true. For me to be able to have someone like you or a program that you are developing with the consciousness and the love and the real knowledge that you're putting into this program, that's life-changing.
Yeah, and I so appreciate you sharing that because it's a beautiful example of a lot of things, but two that really come to mind for me. And one is just how intertwined our own experience as parents is with our role of being a parent. That when you're dealing with a situation that's highly emotionally charged, and it could be losing a job, it could be a breaking up of a relationship, it could be a health issue, any number of things. But as parents, it's impossible to separate those two things. And it also just shines such a beautiful, brilliant, bright light on the fact that our children, even when they're much, much younger, are so smart. They're so aware. They see everything. They take everything in. And again, to think that you could separate your role as a parent from your role of just who you are living your own life, I think is really naive. And I think your story really illustrates that beautifully. To be going through all that and to be having your own personal struggles and think that you can just show up and be, that impossible to be perfect parent still is really not realistic. It's not possible to do. And the other thing I just love about your story, and it's so powerful and so important for people to remember, especially if they are experiencing struggles, is that it really is never too late. It's just amazing. Like, I will work with families whose children are in high school and they think it's too late, or they're in college, or they're out of college and they think it's too late. They think they've lost those relationships. And when the parent starts showing up differently, it doesn't happen overnight. Again, it's not like a panacea kind of a thing because, again, the young people are so smart and they're aware of kind of the history. There's, in my experience, always kind of a, really? Like, who are you and what have you done with my mother kind of thing. But over a period of time, when we start showing up differently, we do get that relationship back. And it is absolutely possible to get back to the truth of the relationship, which is always that the parents love their children. It's even in the most difficult and really sometimes terrible situations, the parents always love their children. And in my experience, they're always doing the very best they can with what I call the awareness, skills, and knowledge that they have. And if they're willing to get more awareness and more skills and more knowledge and show up differently, then things can absolutely change. And I love your story because it proves that that's true. You can, even if the road's been rocky, get back to a place where the relationship is beautiful and exactly what you would want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And the children love the parents. And so parents, let me just say that because, Yeah, this is actually an emotional conversation for me because I can go back and feel that despair. I can go back and feel that hopelessness. I could go back and cry this moment thinking that I would never have a relationship with one of my kids, that just wasn't going to happen because there had just been too many arguments and too many years had gone by. And I can tell you, your children love you just like you love them. And without a doubt, there's always hope. And Robert, what you said is absolutely spot on. When we show up differently as parents, the relationship changes. And I'll just go one step further. It is our responsibility as the parent in the relationship to show up differently, regardless. I will say that. I believe that because I believe that we chose to have our children. Our children didn't choose, for us to be their parents. Well, on some spiritual level, I'd probably argue that they do. But regardless, it is, I believe, our responsibility as parents to do the work, to show up differently, and there's absolutely hope. Robert, the other part of your story that I'd like you to kind of just share more of your sacred story, and I love what you say about you feel it's a responsibility to be able to bring this type of work in order to help others because you've had a different experience and you want to help others have a different experience. Talk a little bit about the Robert McPhee that feels that way.
Well, it was interesting because when you and I were talking at first about having this conversation, and I was so grateful that you invited me to join you here. The topic of the sacred story came up, and it's a powerful two words together, and to look in the mirror and say, what is my sacred story? First of all, it really made me deeply grateful for the life that I've led. From the very beginning, my parents were wonderful, still married to this day, although my father is dealing with some very serious dementia, so he's physically still in this world with us, but most of what I really know of my father is not present anymore. But I really was blessed in the way that I grew up, and although I parented differently than my parents, given that unfair advantage that I've had, the reality is I was extremely blessed with the way that I grew up. And then the other half of that is the part that I already talked about with the opportunities I've had working with some of the amazing teachers on the planet, really, in this area of personal and professional development, people like Jack. So when I looked at that story, what is my sacred story? Well, the first thing, or the thing that I really landed on was when my youngest daughter was born. And the reason for that was because she was born with a very serious injury. It's called a brachial plexus injury. And what happened in a nutshell is that when she was born, her head came out and her shoulders got stuck. And we now know that there's a set of procedures that the doctors are supposed to go through that our doctor did not go through. He just basically yanked on her head. And the nerves that go from her spine to her left arm got damaged. So she has permanent nerve damage in her left arm, and she has limited movement and feeling in her left arm. So she literally she's basically partially paralyzed in her left arm. And obviously it has been her entire life, and she's done personal therapy and had a couple of surgeries and stuff to correct that as best as possible. But the reality is she has a permanent injury that will affect her whole life. And the reason that came up, I think, as like a sacred story moment was not so much that it was like my story, but it was a moment in my life where it was a profound opportunity to implement my story, to implement the story of how I've grown up and the opportunities that I have had to learn from these amazing people. And it was kind of this is all interesting to talk about this stuff, but now it's time to kind of put up or shut up. Like, are you really going to live by these principles? Because there was a huge invitation into anger and resentment and victimhood in a situation like that. And I saw a lot of other parents. We were actually part of a parent support group for parents who found themselves in a situation. It's called a brachial plexus injury, and it actually occurs in about 1 in every 2,500 births or something like that. And some of the injuries are more serious than others, but a lot of the parents went immediately to being victims and focusing on all the things that their children would never be able to do and how unfair it was and how wrong it was and all those kinds of things. And my wife and I made a very conscious decision, again, based on how we had grown up and the work that we had done, to say, no, that's not the way we're going to handle this. We're going to focus on what Lisa can do and what her opportunities are, not what she can't do and what she won't be able to do and, you know, the fact that she's a victim. And it made a fundamental difference. You know, that I just look at that point in my life where there was an opportunity to go down one road or to go down another. And the fact that we chose to focus on her strengths and what she can do, I think was really a turning point. I know it was a turning point for her because I think her life would be fundamentally different if we hadn't done that, if we had brought her up feeling like she was a victim and focusing on her limitations instead of her possibilities. It would have been completely different. But that was really the moment that came up. And it was interesting as I thought about it because it made me realize again why this work with parents is so important to me, because I had an opportunity in that moment to make probably a very different decision than I would have made had I not had the opportunities that I had had, first of all, growing up, and then second of all, in my professional life. And my daughter, just so you know, I mean, she does have a permanent injury, but basically you'd never know it. She just finished her first year at Stanford. She used to play all-star softball. She was a pitcher in softball, even though she basically only had one arm. And she just never let it get in her way. And, you know, as a parent, I'd like to think I'm here to inspire my children, but the reality is this is an example of it being the exact opposite. My daughter inspires me in so many ways. She's so amazing. And you can probably hear it in my voice, but I'm so incredibly proud of her and happy for her, just based on not only what she's accomplished, but who she is as a person. So that was what came up for me when we had that conversation about Sacred Stories.
You know, I'm so thankful that you shared that story. One, I didn't know that about your family, your daughter, and the decisions that you and your wife made. But I think it really underscores, because up until that point in our conversation, one could think or imagine that you just have the perfect life and the perfect children and the perfect everything. So how could you know about making excellent decisions, right, with parenting? I mean, to be quite honest, no, it's true. I mean, and you even said it.
I know. I got it.
Yeah. All that, right? So I think it's just a beautiful reminder that we really cannot in any way assume anything about anybody, judge anybody for anything, and everyone has their story. And Robert McCree, you and your family have made very conscious, excellent decisions, right, throughout your life about that was a defining moment and how were you going to respond. And that is very powerful. That is inspiring. And that is why the work that you do is so meaningful, because you really do know of what you speak.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you putting that kind of context on it, because it makes me realize, you know, this is before the excellent decisions work was ever on my radar at all, but you're absolutely right. That decision that we made about how we were going to handle that situation with Lisa was absolutely driven by our vision and values, which we had already spent time, you know, doing the work, you know, looking at what is our vision for our family, what are our values, what's really important to us, how do we want to live our lives. So when we found ourselves in that high stress, high pressure situation, and it was pretty crazy, you know, we're going to doctors and, you know, they used the word permanent injury when she was like 6 weeks old. That was the first time we even heard that. We thought she just had like a little, you know, tweak when she was born. My son was born with a broken collarbone. They put him in a sling for 2 weeks and he was fine. And so all of a sudden we hear the words permanent injury. That's some pretty, as a parent, that's a pretty serious external stress and pressure. And I wanted to take video back to that doctor and show her, you know, my daughter pitching in softball and say, yeah, take your permanent injury and, you know, stick it in your trash can. I'll show you permanent injury. Tell me again about all the things you won't be able to do. But it really was a decision driven by vision and values rather than stress and pressure. And I appreciate you putting that context, because I don't know that I've ever really looked at it that way. But it is, and it brings up the importance of doing the work before we're in those high stress, high pressure situations, because it puts us in a position to make better decisions and to stay away from situations that we ultimately really don't want to be in. And with parenting, it's like, those opportunities come almost daily in terms of the conversations we're in, the small things. That was a pretty big situation, but I think as I look back on being a parent, some of the most profound moments are just the little conversations, the small things. And, something happened and how you responded. It makes all the difference in the world. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Well, Robert, share with our listeners how they can find you, work with you, because it's, whether you're a parent planning on being a parent, whether your children are small, big, it really doesn't matter. As we say, it's never too late or early to actually really start changing the relationship and changing the way we show up, in relationship with our children. So, Robert, how can people find you?
Simplest way to learn more about me is to go to my main website, which is excellentdecisions.com. And you'll find out more about the work that we're doing. We do work with organizations, we do work with parents, and we do work with schools. And it's all on that website. I'm very easy to find. I'm not one of these people who has like 5 gatekeepers, keeping me protected from the outside world. I love to hear from people who listen in a conversation like this, and their curiosity is piqued. So people can reach out to me through my personal email, which is robert@heartset, HEARTSET.com, which is the name of the company that I started about 20 years ago. And again, they can find me through you or whatever, but the website or my private email is probably the best way, and would love to hear from people and get their response to this conversation, which is very profound. I'm so glad we had the opportunity to do this.
Oh, me too. Robert McPhee, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. And listeners, I want to say thank you for joining us. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our feed on iTunes and or Stitcher. Like us, comment, share the news of Sacred Stories so that more people can join in the conversations with myself, Robert McPhee, and others.